Good morning. I'm Sieg Johnson, Senior Pastor of Christ of the Hills United Methodist Church in Hot Springs Village, Arkansas. Last week I shared with you a brief Lenten devotional describing Lent's 40 days using the imagery of the wilderness. I was focusing on the Hebrew Bible's description of Moses and the Bnei Yisrael, the children of Israel, leaving Egypt and then wandering for 40 years in the wilderness. And we looked at Numbers chapter 33, a passage that describes them setting out and camping, and setting out from there and camping, and setting out from there and camping. Just over and over, 42 times we read of those camps becoming stages, and each camp, of course, became the starting point for the next day's journey, the continuation of the journey. And so it was a very fluid moment for the people of Israel. And every day things were changing. And we find ourselves in a wilderness just now. Call it the COVID-19 wilderness. And ours is a fluid situation also. Daily we're looking at different stats in the news of how many people have contracted the disease worldwide, and then in the United States, and then in the state of Arkansas. And we're hoping to see that curve flatten and, of course, new cases diminish. Biblically speaking, a wilderness mentality means that we look for a time when all this will be past us, when it will pass over, to use another very rich and biblical image. The wilderness, then, it's an in-between place, a place between what was for the Hebrews for 400 years in Egypt and what will be the promised land when they would come to the Jordan River and cross it. So you might say Israel, during this time, the children of Israel, were in limbo. Feels like we're in limbo right now, doesn't it? Stalled in between what was and what will be. Families feel in limbo. Churches closed down. Businesses closed down. During this time of Lent, 2020, 40 days of Lent, and perhaps far beyond, we're in a wilderness experience of becoming something else tomorrow than we were yesterday. And our wandering is no longer global. We don't travel now, but our wandering is from room to room. That's pretty much the extent of our travels right now. In a word, we're stalled. And because we're stalled, we feel incredibly vulnerable. Today, this morning, I want to focus on another image, not the wilderness, but something very, very similar. It's like the wilderness, the image of the doorway between one room and another room. And as we cross any doorway, that becomes a threshold to cross over from here to there. And this doorway, this threshold, is a liminal zone. The word liminal sounds like limbo, and that's truly what a doorway is. So you might call these devotional thoughts this morning pastoral meditations from limbo land. When one stands in a doorway, no longer am I where I was, but I'm not yet there either. I'm just in the doorway, in the threshold. The reason I'm thinking about this is an article I read in the Jerusalem Post online a couple of weeks ago as the COVID-19 pandemic was gaining full steam, that one of Israel's chief rabbis, Ashkenazi Chief Rabbi David Lau, had asked Jewish people to suspend the custom of touching or kissing the mezuzah when they crossed the threshold of their homes, or kissing the fingers after they had touched the mezuzah. And the article was cute. It said they are kissing goodbye to this custom of kissing the mezuzah during this coronavirus outbreak. The rabbi said it's enough to think about the mezuzah rather than to touch or to kiss it. So what's a mezuzah, you ask? Well, I'm glad you did ask. The mezuzah, and I have one here that was a gift to me in one of my trips to Jerusalem from a dear friend of mine who lives there, is placed at the doorpost of homes and gates in Israel. The mezuzah is placed there to remind them that they are God's and their life is God's, whether they are at home or away. And their custom is to often touch the mezuzah when they're passing through the doorway, and sometimes to kiss their fingers after they do that. It's this that the chief rabbi was saying needs to be suspended during the COVID-19 outbreak. The mezuzah then fulfills the command of God in Deuteronomy chapter 6. It's called the Shema, and I'd like to read that passage now from Deuteronomy chapter 6, beginning in verse 4. Hear, O Israel, Shema Yisrael, Adonai Eloheinu, Adonai Echad. Hear, O Israel, the Lord is our God, the Lord alone. You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your might. Keep these words that I am commanding you today in your heart. Recite them to your children when you are at home and when you are away. That is, when you've passed through the threshold. Bind them as a sign on your hand and fix them as an emblem on your forehead. And here's the command, and write them on the doorpost of your house and on your gates. So the mezuzah seeks to fulfill that command in Deuteronomy chapter 6, that those very words on a tiny scroll are placed in the mezuzah. Keep these words on the doorpost of your house and on your gates. That's what the mezuzah does. And it's a wonderful way to recognize that the doorway is an in-between place separating where you are from where you're going, home from away. That's the place we must necessarily pass through in any of our transitions from here to there. So the mezuzah reminds us that wherever we go, wherever we are, at home or away, we have a higher calling upon our lives, no less away than at home, no less here than there. The world is in an in-between place right now. Much of what we were, we are no longer, at least not for the time being. As we transition from here to there, we seem suspended in limbo, hung in the doorway of our becoming. Our families, our churches, our businesses, our nation, our world. We're in limbo. And the word vulnerability is a good word to describe those threshold moments in our lives. The doorway is a place of surging energy as we realize we're going into a new place. And sometimes that new place is terra incognita. It's uncharted territory. And cultural expressions around the world seek to meet the awkwardness of the threshold. Could be as simple as laying a mat of welcome at the doorway to ease any anxiety of those coming into your home so that they might feel welcome. Or it could be a superstition like a horseshoe above the doorway for good luck. Or it could be a deeply religious symbol such as the mezuzah. But all these do the same thing. They seek to cushion the energy of the threshold. The mezuzah then becomes a way to sacramentalize our lives at home and away, here and there, so that we can seek to live momentously and to capture life's moments, even when we're in the wilderness, in a way that says God is here and God is there. We can't meet in the sanctuary right now in-person worship because of the world's situation. So we're in limbo. But God is not just here and there. God is also in our most vulnerable moments. God with us. Emmanuel is the Hebrew word meaning God with us. It's not just that God was with us when we were meeting or will be with us when we can finally gather together as a church, but God is with us even now. Not somewhere else, but all around us in a succession of astonishments if we will just open our eyes to see God's working. This, in other words, is our mezuzah moment. Finally, thinking of these two images, the wilderness and the doorway, makes me think of Daniel Boone. the pioneer of the American wilderness, who entered doorways in the time of American expansion. He ever was crossing thresholds into the uncharted. And he wrote this: "I never was lost in the woods in my whole life, but I once was confused for 3 days." I've always loved that quote because it points out a legitimate distinction between feeling totally lost and feeling just confused. Daniel Boone knew he wasn't lost because he trusted his abilities to get through whatever uncomfortable and vulnerable doorway he may find himself in. In other words, Daniel Boone knew that he knew what to do in the between times. And that's the question I leave you with. Do we know what to do in the between times? As businesses are closed, as churches are closed, as we seek not to have large gatherings so we don't pass on this coronavirus, do we know what to do in the between times? I am so thankful in the times that I've called and spoken with our own church members and family members and in a new world right now that we're finding our way. We're not lost. We may be confused for a while, but we know that God is with us where we were, where we will be, and right now in this place. Why don't we end with a prayer? Our God, we give you thanks that you are with us wherever we are, here, there, home, away, and even in the doorway, in the transition between here and there. Help the mezuzah to remind us that we are yours, that you are ours, that we love you and you love us. Guide us now into the future. Guide our country, be with our leaders, our world leaders, as we deal with this crisis. Be with those who are sick. Be with us all for the glory of your Son, Jesus Christ, in whose name we pray.